Can you summarize for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury your diagnoses of Megan Richards?
So, at present, with the weight of some new evidence on the MRI, as I explained, in the light of this neuroimaging findings, I indicated that she appears to have sustained a more complicated mild traumatic brain injury versus a concussion, along with the post-traumatic stress disorder, which is still certainly relevant and significant, and that's secondary to the motor vehicle collision on 4/22/2015.
What about this in terms of anxiety and depressed mood?
So the adjustment disorder that she had, I also gave her an adjustment disorder, which is in addition to it's a little bit different from the PTSD. Adjustment disorder are things where a person is having to try to adjust to changes in their lifestyle as a result of some external event. So part of that is that at the time that I saw her in November, for the evaluation in October, she was just trying to get back into school, and that was troubling for her. And so I was looking at those secondary, sort of not minor, but not the significant difficulties she was having as related to the PTSD as meriting the adjustment disorder with anxiety and depressed mood. That's more of a secondary or tertiary diagnosis.
I want to ask you to assume, Doctor, that her boyfriend, Jacob Lane, will testify that Megan can ask him something as simple as, would you go to the store and get something for me? And he does, and he goes back, takes it back, and then a few minutes later she'll ask him, would you go to the store and get something, the same thing for me? And he says, Megan, I've already done that. And then a few minutes later she'll say, Jacob, would you go to the store and get something for me? And he said, well, Megan, I just told you, I just went. Is that indicative of the kind of traumatic brain injury that you have diagnosed Megan with, a mild traumatic brain injury, to be able to not be able to remember short-term what you've already asked a few minutes before or made some question to someone a few minutes before?
So let me speak to that, because that reflects more of the disruption in her ability to attend and the reduced efficiency in getting new information in. One of the things that we saw, and by the way, that attention, that working memory, that ability to focus is seen both in the PTSD, which structurally changes the brain, and in the mild TBI. And so there's an overlap. And so what's interesting is it's really hard to tease out which one is which contributing to that. They could both be doing it, and they could be contributing together, if you will. So the important point to understand is that she kind of goes offline at times, and I think that's what that reflects, is not being able to really always register, always pay attention, always keep things in her short-term register, short-term memory. And I think if she's exposed to the information over and over and over again, that she eventually does learn it. So she's not showing drastic memory problems. She's showing more of these executive problems. And that's very consistent also, by the way, with that left frontal injury that was shown on the MRI.
Now, in the setting of a practicing nurse at a hospital in an ICU unit, are the executive functions of the brain regularly employed?
Executive abilities are employed in everything that we do, always. That's why they call them the executive abilities. They sort of guide all behaviors that we do, where they monitor our behavior, they involved in problem solving, in planning, in self-monitoring, you name it. Without your executive abilities, and depending on how impaired they are, one really it begins to show more and more dysfunction.
Does PTSD result in, or can PTSD itself result in physical changes to the brain?
Yes, it can.
Can, when you combine that PTSD diagnosis, and you said it's severe in Megan's case?
It's severe, yes.
When you combine that with the physical shearing that Dr. Forcine discovered on the MRI, how do you have an opinion, sir, as to how those physical changes to Megan's brain in the executive functioning area of the left frontal lobe, how that might translate into her ability to function in the real world outside of the classroom setting?
So I'm going to go back to the fact that there is some overlap between those two entities, and to the degree that those probably mutually influence or affect one another, the PTSD and the mild TBI. And so it's really not, it would be difficult to say what this particular deficit is attributed just to the TBI and this one is just particularly attributed to the PTSD. So you have to see them as sort of a synergistic effect, and that's actually good science, and that's right out of the textbook on brain injury by Kennedy, which is an excellent source, published in 2011. So they look at that, and the other point is that that with a mild TBI and PTSD, the mild TBI at minimum probably interferes with Megan's ability to cope with the PTSD by interfering with her executive abilities, because part of what people do when they're having PTSD is that they try to cope, and part of that coping mechanism is brought online by those frontal executive systems. And to the degree that those are impaired by the mild TBI, you have somewhat of a compromise in that. So there is this synergistic effect going on.